At a party with my husband's friends, I tried to kiss him while dancing. He pulled away and said,
"I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you."
Everyone laughed. Then he added,
"You don't even meet my standards. Stay away from me."
The laughter got louder. I smiled like it didn't hurt, but when I finally answered, the room went silent. Some words sting, but mine cut deeper. Remember when someone asks what you do? Just say you work at the hospital. Caleb coached me as I zipped myself into the designer dress he'd selected, but never once complimented. Don't mention you run the cardiac unit. These people don't want to hear about medical stuff at parties. He was rehearsing me again the same way he did before every gathering with his investment firm crowd, scripting my responses to ensure I never outshone him. 5 years ago, he'd bragged to everyone about marrying a surgeon. Now he treated my career like an embarrassing secret that might accidentally slip out if I wasn't careful enough. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me today. If you believe that public humiliation in a marriage is never acceptable and that everyone deserves respect, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting the emerald green fabric that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The dress was beautiful, I suppose, but it felt like a costume for a play where I'd forgotten all my lines. Behind me, Caleb continued his preparation ritual, checking his collar for the 17th time. Yes, I counted. It was easier to focus on his obsessive adjustments than to think about how we'd gotten here.
"The Jenkins will be there,"
he continued, scrolling through his phone.
"Remember, he's in mergers and acquisitions, not private equity. Don't mix that up again. And his wife's name is Patricia, not Paula."
I wanted to tell him that I'd been calling her Patricia for 3 years, that the Paula incident was his mistake at last year's Christmas party. But corrections weren't part of our script anymore. Instead, I watched him transform himself in the mirror, each adjustment to his appearance, another step away from the man who'd once waited outside the hospital with coffee and flowers after my tough surgeries. "I saved a 12-year-old boy today," I said quietly, testing the waters. "His mitral valve was. That's great, honey." Caleb interrupted, not looking up from his phone. "But nobody wants to hear about blood and procedures over cocktails. Makes people uncomfortable. Just stick to light topics. The weather vacation plans may be that new restaurant downtown everyone's talking about. The weather. 5 years of medical school. 3 years of residency. 2 years running the cardiac unit at one of the country's best hospitals. And he wanted me to discuss cloud formations with investment bankers who probably couldn't locate their own pulse points." My phone buzzed with a message from my surgical team. The boy was stable, already asking when he could play baseball again. His mother had cried when I told her the surgery was successful. Those tears meant more to me than any party invitation ever could, but mentioning them would violate Caleb's carefully constructed rules of engagement. Also, Caleb added, finally looking at me through the mirror, rather than directly. "Marcus asked about our plans for the Hamilton fundraiser next month. I told him we'd take a table. It's $50,000, but it's important for visibility." $50,000 for visibility. Meanwhile, the pediatric ward needed new monitoring equipment that the hospital board deemed too expensive at $30,000. I'd been planning to make a personal donation, but apparently our money was already allocated for Caleb's networking opportunities.
"Ready?"
he asked, though it wasn't really a question. He was already heading for the door, expecting me to follow like a well-trained accessory. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Caleb reviewed names and details about tonight's guests, treating me like an actress who needed coaching before her performance. Tom Morrison closed that pharmaceutical deal last week. Congratulate him, but don't ask for details. And avoid Jennifer Whitfield if she's been drinking. She gets chatty about their marriage problems. I nodded at appropriate intervals while thinking about my patient's mother, how she'd grabbed my hands and blessed me in 3 different languages. That was real. That was substantial. This elevator ride to another party where I'd pretend to be less than I was. This was the performance. The Vowie took our car with practiced efficiency. Caleb's hand moved to my lower back as we entered Marcus's building, not out of affection, but positioning. He did this at every public event, marking his territory while simultaneously keeping me at the precise distance that suggested togetherness without actual intimacy. "Remember," he whispered as we waited for the penthouse elevator. "Smile more tonight. You looked miserable at the last party." "These are important people, Claire. My career depends on these relationships. His career, not ours, never ours anymore." The elevator opened directly into Marcus's penthouse, and I watched Caleb transform completely. His shoulders straightened, his smile activated with practiced precision. His voice dropped to that confident timbre he thought made him sound more authoritative. "Marcus," he called out, releasing my back to shake hands with enthusiasm that would disappear the moment we got home. "Caleb and Claire." Marcus added my name like an afterthought, his eyes already moving past me to see who else had arrived. This was my role now. The afterthought, the +1, the silent partner in a partnership that had become anything but equal. Jennifer Whitfield approached with air kisses and champagne. "Clear, darling, you look lovely. That dress is divine. Caleb has such good taste. Even my appearance wasn't my own achievement anymore. The dress I wore, the shoes I stood in, the careful way I'd styled my hair, all credited to my husband's selections, as if I were a doll he dressed for display." "Thank you," I responded with the measured tone I'd learned kept conversations brief. Too much enthusiasm invited follow-up questions. Too little marked me as difficult. The balance was exhausting. "Claire works at the hospital." Caleb interjected smoothly when Marcus asked what I'd been up to lately. "Just works at the hospital, not runs the cardiac surgery unit, or saved a child's life today, or makes twice my salary keeping people alive. Just works at the hospital like I organized filing systems or delivered meal trays." I stood there in my expensive dress, holding champagne. I didn't want smiling at people who looked through me rather than at me, and made a decision. Tonight would be different. Tonight, I would try one more time to connect with the man I'd married, to find some remnant of the person who'd once been proud of my accomplishments instead of threatened by them. One more attempt to salvage what we'd built before it collapsed entirely. If that failed, and part of me already knew it would, then at least I'd know I'd tried everything before whatever came next. The conversation around me shifted to quarterly projections and market volatility terms that floated past like background static. While I watched the room transform, someone had dimmed the lights, and the music changed from upbeat cocktail jazz to something slower, more intimate. Marcus took Jennifer's hand with practiced ease, leading her to the space they'd cleared near the terrace doors. Tyler pulled Sarah close, whispering something that made her laugh and rest her head on his shoulder. I stood at the edge of their happiness, holding my empty wine glass like a prop I'd forgotten how to use. The couples moved together with such natural synchronization, such obvious comfort in each other's presence. When had Caleb and I lost that, or had we ever really had it? A server passed with a tray of champagne. I set down my empty glass and took a fresh one, drinking it faster than I should have. The bubbles burned slightly, giving me something to focus on, besides the growing ache in my chest. Across the room, Caleb was deep in discussion with Bradley, and some client whose name I'd already forgotten, his hands moving animatedly as he explained something that had them all nodding like synchronized puppets. The piano intro of a song I recognized filled the space. It was similar to what had played at our wedding reception at the Drake Hotel 5 years ago. Not the exact song, but close enough to make my breath catch. That night, Caleb had pulled me onto the empty dance floor at 2:00 in the morning. Both of us barefoot and drunk on champagne and possibility. "We're going to have such a beautiful life," he'd whispered against my ear. "Kids, a house with a garden, Sunday mornings reading the paper on the porch. Everything, Claire. We're going to have everything. The memory pushed me forward before I could think better of it. My hand found Caleb's elbow, the fabric of his suit jacket smooth and expensive under my fingers. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. Bradley looked at me with barely concealed irritation. The client seemed confused, and Caleb's jaw tightened in that way that meant I'd broken protocol. "Dance with me!" The words came out smaller than I'd intended. More plea than invitation. Caleb's eyes flicked to his colleagues, calculating the social mathematics of the moment. Refusing would look bad. Accepting would interrupt his networking. I could see him weighing options, finding the path of least resistance.
"Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me,"
he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes.
"Duty calls. Duty. That's what I'd become."
His hand on my waist felt pre-unctor, positioned at the exact distance that suggested marriage without intimacy. My hand on his shoulder met fabric that may as well have been armor. We began to move, but it was mechanical, like two strangers following dance class instructions rather than a married couple sharing a moment. "The Patterson deal looks promising," he said. His eyes focused somewhere over my shoulder, probably tracking who was talking to whom, which connections were being made without him. "That's nice," I murmured, trying to pull him closer to find some echo of the man who'd once danced with me until sunrise. His body resisted maintaining that careful distance. Everything about him radiated impatience. The tap of his fingers against my waist. The way his weight shifted like he was already planning his exit. The constant surveillance of the room that meant I wasn't worth his full attention even for one dance. Around us, other couples swayed with easy intimacy. Jennifer had her arms wrapped around Marcus's neck, her shoes abandoned, somewhere laughing at something he'd whispered. Sarah and Tyler were barely moving, just holding each other like the rest of the room had disappeared. Even the older couples, the ones who'd been married for decades, moved with a comfortable familiarity that made my chest tight. The wine and the music and the memory of better times created a moment of dangerous hope. Maybe if I could just bridge this distance, just remind him of what we used to have. I watched Jennifer kiss Marcus's cheek, saw Tyler brush Sarah's hair back with gentle fingers, noticed how every other couple seemed to exist in their own private bubble of affection. I leaned in. It wasn't meant to be dramatic or passionate. Just a simple kiss. The kind married people share at parties when the music is soft and the lighting is forgiving. The kind that says, "We're still here, still us, still together despite everything." Caleb jerked back so violently that several people turned to look. His face contorted with genuine disgust, as if I'd tried to force something toxic into his mouth. And then loud enough for everyone to hear, clear enough that the music couldn't mask it. He said the words that would replay in my mind forever. "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you." The laughter was immediate and cruel. Marcus nearly spilled his drink. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth in delighted shock. Bradley actually applauded, as if Caleb had just delivered a punchline they'd all been waiting for. The sound crashed over me in waves. Each laugh a separate wound. Each chuckle a confirmation that I was the joke had always been the joke. But Caleb wasn't finished. The laughter had fed something in him, validated whatever narrative he'd been constructing about us, about me. He raised his voice, making sure everyone could hear the encore.
"You don't even meet my standards! Stay away from me!"
More laughter. Someone whistled. A phone appeared in someone's hand. Were they recording this? My face burned, but my body had gone cold, frozen in the center of their amusement, like a specimen pinned for examination. The room spun slightly, not from the champagne, but from the sudden, devastating clarity that flooded through me. Every red flag I'd ignored assembled itself into a parade of truth. The anniversary dinner he'd canceled for an urgent client meeting that his Instagram revealed never happened. The separate bedrooms during stressful quarters that had somehow extended for 8 months. The way his clothes sometimes smelled like perfume I didn't own. The mysterious charges on our credit card he'd explained away as client entertainment. The way he'd stopped saying I love you except as a response, never an initiation. I stood there in my expensive dress, surrounded by laughter that sounded like breaking glass, and understood with perfect clarity that I'd been performing CPR on something that had been dead for years. I'd been so focused on trying to revive what we'd had that I hadn't noticed the corpse had started to rot. Something shifted inside me, a tectonic plate sliding into a new position. The humiliation was still there, burning like acid. But underneath it, something else emerged. Something cold and calculating, something that understood the difference between being hurt and being destroyed. They were still laughing, but I wasn't broken. Not anymore. My smile started small, just a slight upturn at the corners of my mouth. Not the polite smile I'd perfected for these gatherings, not the diplomatic expression I wore during hospital board meetings. This was something else entirely, something that came from a deeper place, and I watched as it made the laughter around me falter and die like a flame suddenly deprived of oxygen. You know what, Caleb? My voice came out steady, clinical, the same tone I used when explaining terminal diagnosis to families. You're absolutely right. I don't meet your standards. His smirk widened, mistaking my agreement for surrender. Bradley chuckled and clapped him on the shoulder. Marcus raised his glass in mock salute. They thought they were witnessing my final humiliation, my acceptance of his public rejection. Your standards require someone who doesn't know about the Fitzgerald account. The words landed like surgical instruments on a steel tray. Caleb's expression shifted, the smugness draining away as if someone had pulled a plug. His eyes darted to Bradley, then back to me. The room had gone quiet enough that I could hear the ice settling in someone's glass.
What are you talking about?
Caleb's voice had lost its confident timbre. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. The device suddenly feeling like a weapon I'd been concealing all evening. Your standards need someone who hasn't spent the last 3 months documenting every discrepancy in our accounts. Someone who didn't hire a forensic accountant when she noticed $50,000 moving through shell companies in the Caymans. Jennifer leaned forward, her perfectly contoured face showing the first genuine emotion I'd ever seen from her. Marcus sat down his drink with a sharp click against the marble counter. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from cruel amusement to electric tension.
This is ridiculous,
Caleb said, but his voice cracked on the last syllable. I swiped through my phone with deliberate slowness, letting each motion build the tension. Here's the audit report. Shell company registration documents, bank transfers dated the same days you claimed to be at conferences. That interesting fact you never actually attended. I turned the screen toward the crowd, watching them lean in like moths to a flame. Owen Bradley, these two. Tuesday, March 15th, 3:47 p.m. Should I play the recording of you two discussing how to destroy evidence before the quarterly review? Bradley's face went from tan to gray in seconds. You can't. I touched the play button. Caleb's voice filled the room from my phone speaker. Tiny but unmistakable. We need to wipe everything before Davidson checks the books. Transfer it through the subsidiary. Then close it down. Make it look like a client error. Someone dropped a glass. The sound of it shattering against marble punctuated Caleb's recorded confession perfectly. Marcus stumbled backward, his hand reaching for the wall to steady himself. The Fitzgerald account. That was my father's retirement portfolio. Your standards,
I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos beginning to build, also require someone who doesn't know about Amanda. Who's Amanda? Sarah's voice was sharp, but she wasn't asking me. She had turned to Tyler, her boyfriend, whose face had suddenly gone pale. The 23-year-old intern from Tyler's firm, I said, watching the dominoes begin their inevitable cascade. The one who needed that marketing position so desperately. The one Caleb's been visiting at her apartment every Thursday. Tyler's cousin, actually. Funny how these things connect. Sarah's hand connected with Tyler's face before he could respond. The slap echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Your cousin, the one you said needed help with her career. Your standards need someone who doesn't read text messages. I scrolled through my phone, finding the screenshots I'd saved like this one from 3 hours ago. Can't wait to be done with this boring party so I can see you tomorrow. Claire's so desperate it's embarrassing. Or this one from last Tuesday. My wife is pathetic. She actually thinks I'm working late. Jennifer had moved closer, reading over my shoulder. Oh my God, she whispered, then louder, turning to Marcus. The pills! The pills missing from our medicine cabinet! You said you didn't. What pills? Marcus asked, but his confusion seemed genuine. The little blue ones. Jennifer's voice was rising. You said you didn't need them, but they keep disappearing. And now she whirled on Caleb. You were at our house last week for the game. You used our bathroom. Caleb lunged toward me, then his hand reaching for my phone. But I sidestepped with the same precision I used when navigating around operating tables. Years of surgical training had taught me economy of movement, and he stumbled past me, catching himself on a decorative table that wobbled under his weight. The Whitman portfolio, I announced to the room, which had become a tableau of frozen horror. Check your statements, everyone. Really check them. Those spectacular returns Caleb's been showing. Creative mathematics. The money's been siphoned into accounts in Panama. The FBI knows about all of it. You're lying. Caleb's voice had gone high, desperate. I pulled up another document on my phone. The federal prosecutor's office disagrees. This is the confirmation that arrest warrants will be served Monday morning at your firm. During the partner meeting specifically, Agent Patterson thought that timing would be particularly effective. The room erupted. Marcus was shouting about his father's money. Jennifer was screaming at Marcus about the pills and asking how he could not have known. Sarah was demanding Tyler explain his role in everything, while he stammered denials. Bradley had his phone out frantically typing, probably trying to move money or warn someone or book a flight to a non-extradition country. Through it all, Caleb stood frozen in the center of the chaos he'd created, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For once, he had no script, no charming deflection, no audience ready to laugh at his cruelty. Oh, and Caleb, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Your mother knows everything. Eleanor called me last week after her accountant found discrepancies in the pension fund you manage for her. We had a very interesting conversation about where your father's retirement money actually went. His legs seemed to give out. Then he sank onto one of Marcus's designer chairs, his head in his hands. The man who'd stood in the center of the room, comparing me to a dog 5 minutes ago, had been reduced to something small and pathetic, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. The sound of my heels on marble was the only noise as I walked toward the door, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted, some staring at me with shock, others with something that might have been respect or fear. At the entrance to the penthouse, I turned back one final time. The scene was perfect in its destruction. Trust fund kings and queens reduced to screaming accusations at each other. The careful social architecture they'd built, crumbling as each revelation exposed another lie, another betrayal, another crime. And in the center of it all, my husband, no, my soon-to-be ex-husband, sat with his face in his hands, finally understanding what it felt like to be stripped bare and humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to him. I pushed through the penthouse door and into the hallway, my heels creating a sharp rhythm against the marble floor. Behind me, the chaos continued, voices raised in accusation, furniture scraping, as people moved Jennifer's shrill demands for answers, cutting through it all. But ahead of me lay only silence and the gleaming elevator doors at the end of the corridor. My hand was steady as I pressed the call button, though I could feel the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving something hollow in its wake. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that seemed too cheerful for what had just transpired. As I stepped inside, Jennifer's voice suddenly called out behind me. "Claire, wait!" She stood in the doorway of the penthouse, her makeup smeared, holding something in her hand. The necklace, a diamond piece she'd been showing off all evening. "This necklace," she said, her voice trembling. "You said it was bought with the Sherman Trust funds. Check the purchase date against the withdrawal records. March 28th, $42,000. The words came out clinical factual. "You might want to take it off before the asset freeze hits Monday. They'll consider it evidence." She yanked the necklace off so quickly the clasp broke. Diamonds scattering across the marble like broken promises. The elevator doors closed on her, scrambling to collect them, and suddenly I was alone in that small mirrored space, descending. 30 seconds. That's what I gave myself. 30 seconds to shake, to feel the magnitude of what I'd just done. My hands trembled as I gripped the rail, my legs suddenly unsteady in heels that had carried me through 12-hour surgeries, but suddenly felt inadequate for this moment. 28 seconds. 29. 30. I straightened my spine, pulled out my phone, and typed a message to my lawyer. "It's done. Everything is in motion. File the papers Monday morning." The response was immediate. "Security footage. They'll have it all. Make sure Patterson knows." The elevator opened to the lobby where the doorman nodded politely, oblivious to the destruction happening 40 floors above. Outside, the valley brought my car around. I'd driven separately, knowing somehow that I'd need my own escape route. The drive home was automatic muscle memory navigating, while my mind replayed every moment, every word, every expression on Caleb's face as his world collapsed. Our house stood dark against the streetlights, looking exactly as it had when we'd left 3 hours ago. Though everything had changed, I parked in the garage and sat for a moment, staring at Caleb's golf clubs mounted on the wall, his mountain bike he never rode. The tools said he'd never opened. Props in a performance of a life he'd wanted people to think he lived. Inside, I moved with purpose. Box after box came up from the basement storage room, the good ones we'd saved from our wedding gifts, sturdy and clean. His Harvard diploma came off the wall, first the frame heavier than expected. The glass reflecting my face back at me like an accusation. Into the box it went, followed by his collection of cufflinks arranged in their velvet case. Each pair a gift from clients whose money he'd been stealing. My phone buzzed continuously, Caleb's name appearing over and over. I let it ring as I packed his suits, each one pressed and hanging in garment bags. His shoes polished and paired. The watch his father had given him for graduation. I held it for a moment, remembering how proud he'd been, how he'd shown it to everyone at dinner that night. His father, whose pension fund Caleb had been draining. A text broke through. "Claire, please let me explain." Then another. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under." And another. "You've ruined everything my whole life." Followed by, "I'll make you pay for this. Then please come back. We can fix this." The emotional whiplash of his messages might have affected me once. Now they were just evidence of a man scrambling for any handhold as he fell.
I found our wedding album in the bottom drawer of his desk, hidden under tax documents. The cover was ivory leather with our initials embossed in gold. Inside, that woman in white smiled back at me, radiant with certainty about her future. Caleb stood beside her, his hand on her waist, looking at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted. When had that look changed? When had she become an accessory to be managed rather than a partner to be cherished? The tears came then, not for him or for us, but for her, that woman who'd believed in forever, who'd thought love meant something more than performance and possession. I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by boxes of his life, and cried for the death of her naive faith in happy endings. My phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen. I saw Jennifer's Instagram story, my sister said, without preamble. It cut off mid-scene, but there was screaming.
"Are you okay? Can you come?"
My voice sounded raw, unfamiliar.
"I'm already in the car. Be there in 3 hours."
The next morning arrived gray and quiet. Emma had arrived at 2:00 a.m. with a suitcase and a bag of groceries, finding me asleep on the couch, surrounded by boxes. She'd covered me with a blanket and started making coffee, the smell pulling me from restless dreams about falling diamonds and marble floors. "You have a meeting," she said, handing me a cup. "David Patterson, 9:00 a.m., Cafe Luna." I'd forgotten I'd told her about it during our late-night planning session. Patterson was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with clear sightlines to both exits. Habits of the profession, I supposed. He stood when he saw me. Professional, but not unkind. Mrs. Hartley, soon to be Ms. Morrison again. He nodded, understanding. I slid the USB drive across the table. 3 years of evidence compressed into a device smaller than my thumb. My mother noticed at first, I explained. She's a retired accountant, does our taxes as a favor. Small discrepancies that didn't match our reported income. I started documenting everything. After that, Patterson reviewed the files on his laptop, his expression growing more serious with each document.
"This is comprehensive.
With what you revealed last night in this documentation, we have enough for federal charges. Caleb's assets will be frozen by noon. Marcus Whitfield and Tyler Coleman are now also under investigation. And my immunity agreement. Ironclad. You were unaware of the criminal activity when it began. You reported it as soon as you discovered it, and you're cooperating fully. You're protected." Back home, Emma had rearranged the furniture, pushing Caleb's chair into the garage, centering the couch I'd bought before meeting him. The one he'd always complained was too soft, too blue, too something. He hated this couch, I said, sinking into it. "Remember when he made you skip Dad's 70th birthday?" Emma said suddenly, said it was a critical client dinner. I nodded, remembering the disappointment in our father's voice when I'd called to cancel. "I saw Instagram photos that night. He was at some club opening with that crowd. No clients, just champagne and people who weren't you." We sat in comfortable silence. Sisters who'd grown apart during my marriage, now finding their way back. Emma pulled out her laptop, and together we began making lists. Lawyer appointments, financial advisors, therapeutic support, practical steps toward a life that would be mine alone. Monday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine streaming through the hospital windows. Emma had left for Milwaukee at dawn, promising to return next weekend, and I'd driven to Northwestern Memorial on autopilot, my mind carefully compartmentalized between the surgery ahead and the knowledge of what was happening across the city. The patient was 17, a basketball player from Lincoln Park High, who'd collapsed during practice with a previously undetected heart defect. His parents sat in his waiting room, holding hands with the same desperate hope I'd seen hundreds of times before. I focused on their faces as I explained the procedure, using their fear to anchor myself in this moment, this purpose, this life that existed, separate from the destruction unfolding in downtown office buildings. In the operating room, my team assembled with practice efficiency. Dr. Rodriguez, my senior resident, studied the monitors while making notes. Sarah, my favorite surgical nurse, laid out instruments with methodical precision. They moved around me like a well-rehearsed orchestra, unaware their conductor was internally tracking time, knowing that at exactly 10:00 a.m., FBI agents would be walking into Davidson Clean and Associates. "Scalpel eye," said my voice steady through the surgical mask. The weight of the instrument in my hand felt like truth, like something real and purposeful. Here in this sterile room with its controlled environment and clear objectives, I could save a life while another life, the one I'd built with Caleb, officially ended. The surgery stretched into its third hour when Dr. Rodriguez commented on my unusual calm. "You're different today, Dr. Morrison. More focused somehow." If only he knew that every precise cut, every careful suture was a meditation against imagining Caleb's face when agents entered that conference room. The partner meeting always started at 10 sharp. Davidson would be mid-presentation about quarterly projections when the doors would open. The arrests would be public, visible, impossible to spin or explain away. 4 hours in, we encountered unexpected scar tissue from an old injury the boy hadn't mentioned. I worked through it methodically, rerouting vessels with the same patience I'd used to document 3 years of financial crimes. Every challenge in this surgery could be solved with skill and persistence. Unlike marriages built on lies, hearts could actually be repaired. 7 hours and 14 minutes after the first incision, I closed the final suture. The boy's heart beat strong and steady on the monitors, a rhythm that would carry him through decades of games and graduations, and all the life Caleb had tried to steal from retirees whose pensions he'd plundered.
"Beautiful work,"
Dr. Rodriguez said as we scrubbed out. "That kid's going to play college ball because of you." I peeled off my surgical cap, my hair damp with perspiration, and checked my phone. 17 missed calls. 3 from numbers I didn't recognize, likely reporters. The rest from various partners at Caleb's firm. The news had broken. In my office, I'd barely sat down when Jennifer Morrison appeared in my doorway. Gone was the perfectly co-ed woman from Friday night's party. Her designer clothes had been replaced with a simple sundress from Target, her face bare of makeup, except for streaks of mascara that suggested she'd been crying in her car. "Can I come in?" Her voice was small, uncertain. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat carefully, as if she might break something, including herself. "Marcus was arrested an hour ago," she said, the words tumbling out. "They came to the house, the FBI. They had a warrant. They took everything. Computers, files, even our phones. I had to borrow my neighbor's cell just to make calls. I waited, not offering comfort or condemnation, just space for her to continue. Our accounts are frozen. All of them, even my personal checking account from before we married. I can't access anything." She laughed, but it was hollow, broken. "I went to 3 ATMs trying to get cash for gas." The girl at the bank looked at me with such pity when she explained the federal hold. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said, meaning it. Whatever Jennifer's faults, she hadn't orchestrated the crimes. "Are you—" She looked up sharply, because I laughed. "Friday night when Caleb said those things to you, I laughed. I've laughed at you for years, Claire. Every party, every gathering, we all did. We called you the Ice Queen, the robot surgeon who didn't know how to have fun." The confession hung between us like a scalpel waiting to cut, and the whole time she continued, tears falling freely. Now Marcus was stealing from his own father from clients who trusted him. He had affairs, multiple affairs. There's apparently a whole separate credit card I never knew about. The FBI agent asked me about trips to Vegas I didn't even know happened. She pulled a tissue from her purse, a regular purse, not the designer bag she usually carried. "I was so busy feeling superior to you laughing at your marriage that I never looked at my own. We were living the same lie, except you were smart enough to see it." My desk phone rang.
I let it go to voicemail, but the display showed a name that made Jennifer flinch. Davidson Klein and Associates. "They're all calling me," I said. "Former colleagues of Caleb's, some fishing for information, trying to figure out their exposure. Others wanting to distance themselves. Make sure I know they had no idea what was happening." "Did they know?" Jennifer asked. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I recognized. "Caleb's former assistant Meredith, Dr. Morrison. I wanted you to know that we all knew about Amanda, about the others too. I'm sorry we never said anything. He used to brag about it at happy hours, said you were too focused on work to notice, said he was planning to leave once the Singapore deal closed. I kept documentation if you need it for divorce proceedings." I showed Jennifer the message. She read it twice, her face crumpling. "They all knew," she whispered. "At every party, every dinner, they all knew our husbands were destroying us for sport." My phone rang again. This time I recognized the number. Eleanor Hartley, Caleb's mother. I'd been dreading this call. "I should take this," I told Jennifer. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Claire, that strength they mocked you for, don't lose it. It's the only reason you're still standing while the rest of us are falling apart." Eleanor's voice was crisp when I answered. Decades of Southern breeding barely concealing her emotion. "Claire, I owe you an apology. Not hello, not how are you. Straight to the point like always. I've been a terrible mother-in-law. I disapproved of your career. Thought you should focus on giving me grandchildren. Criticized you for not supporting Caleb's ambitions properly." I said nothing, letting her continue. "I hired an investigator 6 months ago," she said. "The pension account irregularities were too obvious to ignore. I know everything, the affairs, the stealing, the lies. I've already spoken to the federal prosecutor. I'll testify against my own son if necessary." "Eleanor, he was trying to transfer the house into my name. Did you know that, to hide assets from potential lawsuits? The paperwork was drawn up but never filed. He must have gotten distracted by his scheming." She paused. "I erased him better than this. His father would be devastated." 3 months had passed since the arrests, and autumn had turned Chicago's skyline into a study of gray and gold. I sat in my home office, the one Caleb had never entered because it was too cluttered with medical journals, composing an email to Malcolm Chin, a financial blogger whose readership included every major firm in the city. The subject line read simply, "Documentation you should see." The attachments included court filings, arrest records, and a detailed timeline of the fraud that I'd compiled with my lawyer's blessing. Every document was public record but scattered across different databases. I was simply consolidating them into one devastating package that would appear first whenever anyone searched Caleb's name for the next decade. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. We'd been in contact since I'd connected her with Patricia Aon Quo, an attorney who specialized in cases against predatory executives. "Lawsuit filed this morning. Emotional distress and pregnancy discrimination. Patricia says the timing with your document release is perfect. Thank you, Claire." I'd never expected to become allies with my husband's mistress, but Amanda had been a victim too. 23 years old, told she was special, promised a future that was never going to materialize. She was 7 months pregnant now, living with her parents in Iowa, rebuilding a life that Caleb had derailed with his lies. That evening, I attended the Chicago Children's Hospital Charity Gala, the same event where I'd met Caleb 6 years ago. Back then, I'd been the promising young surgeon he'd pursued. Now I walked in alone, my presence creating ripples of whispered conversations throughout the ballroom. "Claire." Darling Margaret Whitestone approached, her smile tight with curiosity. "How brave of you to come." Brave. As if attending a charity event required courage. As if I were the one who should be hiding. "The children's ward needs support regardless of personal circumstances," I replied, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. Throughout the evening, I watched the social choreography unfold. Caleb's former colleagues clustered in corners,
their bodies angled away from anyone tainted by association with the scandal. Marcus's former clients moved through the room like refugees trying to establish new alliances, while their frozen assets left them scrambling. Near the silent auction tables, I overheard Bradley's wife, Jessica, speaking to a small group of women. We had no idea, of course. Bradley barely knew Caleb outside of work functions. I activated the recording app on my phone, keeping it casually at my side. "Please." Another woman laughed. "Bradley was at every boys' night. Remember that Vegas trip last year? My husband said they were practically celebrating something."
Now we know what the Singapore deal.
Jessica admitted, her voice dropping. "Bradley mentioned it once. Said Caleb had found a creative solution to the funding problem. We should have known creative meant illegal. These admissions, these small acknowledgments of willful blindness, were building blocks in a larger structure of accountability. My lawyer would be very interested in Bradley's prior knowledge of the Singapore deal. The divorce proceedings had begun 2 weeks earlier, and Caleb had arrived with a strategy that was breathtaking in its audacity. His attorney argued that my substantial surgical income should be factored into the settlement, that my earnings should offset his current inability to work due to the criminal proceedings. "Your Honor," Caleb's attorney had stated, "Dr. Morrison earned over $400,000 last year. Mr. Hartley's career has been destroyed by allegations that by federal charges—" My attorney Diana interrupted. "Not allegations, charges based on evidence Dr. Morrison provided after discovering her husband's criminal activity." Diana then produced a folder that made Caleb visibly pale. "We've discovered cryptocurrency wallets in Mr. Hartley's name containing approximately $200,000 in Bitcoin purchased over the last 18 months. Additionally, there's an art collection valued at $300,000 stored in a climate-controlled facility in Schaumburg under his mother's name, but paid for with marital assets. Each revelation was another cut, precise and calculated." Caleb's attorney scrambled to respond, but Diana wasn't finished. "There's also the matter of the boat registration in Michigan, the investment property in Wisconsin he never disclosed, and the safety deposit box at First National containing gold coins and bearer bonds." By the end of that hearing, Caleb's position had crumbled entirely. He would leave the marriage with his criminal defense attorney fees and nothing else. 2 days after the divorce hearing, Sarah Coleman contacted me. Tyler's wife had discovered her own cache of evidence and wanted to compare notes. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Lincoln Park. 2 women bound by the peculiar sisterhood of betrayal. Tyler recorded everything Sarah said, sliding a USB drive across the table. He had this app on his phone that automatically recorded calls, including ones with Caleb. The recordings were damning conversations about moving money, discussions about other accounts they targeted, jokes about their wives being too stupid or too trusting to notice. In one particularly chilling exchange, they laughed about a retired teacher whose entire pension they drained. Her name was Dorothy Pue. Sarah said, "Taught 3rd grade for 40 years. They took everything." That conversation led to another revelation. Sarah had been contacted by 5 other women, all connected to the scandal in various ways. Some were wives of co-conspirators. Others were victims whose husbands' retirement accounts had been plundered. We organized a meeting at my house the following week. 7 women gathered in my living room on a Thursday evening. We ranged in age from 23 to 68, united by our connection to this web of financial crime and emotional violence. There was Margaret Chin, whose husband's entire 401k had vanished. Patricia Williams, whose husband had been Bradley's partner before the firm collapsed. Linda Martinez, who discovered her husband had been facilitating the money laundering. "We're not just victims," I said, opening the meeting. "We're witnesses."
We have information that can expand this investigation, ensure everyone involved is held accountable.
Margaret nodded firmly. "I've been documenting everything for months. My husband thought I didn't understand finance because I taught elementary school. He was wrong. Over wine and carefully organized evidence, we built our case. Each woman contributed pieces, recorded conversations, suspicious documents, financial records that didn't add up. Patricia had emails showing the crime went back 5 years.
Linda had photographs of meetings that were supposedly never held. "They thought we were decorations," Linda said, her voice steady with controlled anger. "Pretty things to display at parties while they built their empires on theft." They never imagined we were paying attention. By the end of that evening, we had enough additional evidence to expand the federal investigation significantly. Our group chat became a command center for accountability. Each woman committed to ensuring that justice reached beyond just the primary conspirators. As I cleaned up after everyone left, I found a sticky note Sarah had left on my kitchen counter. They called us trophy wives. Let's show them what trophies are really made of. Solid gold and impossible to break. I tucked Sarah's note into my kitchen drawer, a small reminder of the solidarity we'd built from shared devastation. 9 months had passed since that first gathering, and today we would all sit together again, but this time in a federal courtroom for Caleb's sentencing. The courthouse stood against a harsh February sky, its limestone columns looking like bars already. I arrived early, wanting to review my victim impact statement one final time. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, but from the weight of speaking for so many who'd been silenced by shame and confusion. The courtroom filled gradually. Eleanor arrived wearing black, her face composed but aged by months of revelation about the son she'd raised. Behind her, the other women from our group filed in, Margaret, Patricia, Linda, Sarah, and 3 others who joined us as the investigation widened. Amanda wasn't there too close to her due date to travel, but she'd sent her own written statement for the judge to review. When they brought Caleb in, the orange jumpsuit had replaced his tailored suits and federal custody had worn away his carefully maintained exterior. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt, the confidence that once commanded rooms reduced to something hollow. His eyes searched the gallery until they found mine, holding my gaze for a moment, before I looked away. "Mrs. Partley." The prosecutor addressed me when my turn came. "You may deliver your statement." I stood my heels clicking against the courtroom floor, with the same rhythm they'd had leaving Marcus's penthouse that night. The podium felt solid under my hands as I began.
Your Honor, I'm not here to talk about the money Caleb stole, though the damage extends to dozens of families. I'm here to talk about the theft that doesn't show up in financial records, the systematic destruction of trust disguised as marriage. Caleb shifted in his seat, his shackles making a small metallic sound. For 5 years, I was married to a man who treated cruelty as entertainment, who would publicly humiliate me at social gatherings, then gaslight me into believing I was too sensitive when I objected. I found receipts hidden in his home office, jewelry designer handbags, spa treatments, gifts purchased but never given kept as trophies of deception. While he told me we needed to budget more carefully.
Eleanor made a small sound, pressing a tissue to her eyes. Those same receipts were filed with documentation for Amanda Harrison's apartment, as if betrayal was just another business expense to be categorized and filed. He kept spreadsheets, Your Honor, actual spreadsheets tracking his lies, his affairs, his stolen money with the same precision he used to track our household expenses while telling me my surgical equipment purchases were excessive. I looked directly at Caleb, then watching him shrink into himself. At a party in front of colleagues and friends, he told me he'd rather kiss his dog than kiss me that I didn't meet his standards. That room laughed while my marriage publicly ended, turned into entertainment for people who knew about his affairs, his theft, his complete moral bankruptcy, but said nothing because it was more fun to watch me not know. The judge leaned forward slightly, his expression grave. The financial crimes destroyed retirements and futures, but the emotional violence he wielded destroyed something deeper. The ability to trust, to feel safe in your own home, to believe that love means something more than performance and possession. He didn't just steal money. He stole years of my life, my confidence, my faith in partnership. That theft has no restitution amount. I returned to my seat as others gave their statements. Dorothy Pue, the retired teacher, speaking about losing her entire pension. Marcus's father describing the betrayal of trusting his son's best friend.
Amanda's written statement read aloud about workplace predation and abandoned promises. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of everything he'd heard.
Mr. Hartley, the federal guidelines suggest 5 years for your financial crimes.
However, the aggravating factors here, the breach of fiduciary trust, the exploitation of marital assets, the systematic nature of your deception, warrant a departure from those guidelines. I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison. The gavel came down with finality. As the guards prepared to lead him away, Caleb turned toward me, mouthing words that looked like, "I'm sorry." But I was already turning away, reaching for Sarah's hand, then Margaret's, creating a chain of women who'd survived similar devastation and found strength in shared truth. Eleanor approached as we left the courtroom. "Claire, what he said in there. I never understood what he put you through. I failed you as a mother-in-law, and I'm deeply sorry." That evening, my apartment filled with the same women who'd gathered months earlier, but the atmosphere had shifted from grief to something resembling hope. Sarah arrived with champagne purchased with funds from Tyler's seized assets, a detail that made us all smile grimly. "To justice," Margaret raised her glass. "To survival," Patricia added. "To never being silent again," Linda concluded. We shared updates on our new lives. Sarah was back in school pursuing the law degree she'd abandoned when Tyler convinced her they didn't need 2 careers. Margaret had started a foundation helping elderly victims of financial fraud. Patricia was dating again, slowly, carefully, but with hope. "I got a letter from Amanda," I announced, pulling it from my purse. They gathered around as I read aloud. She was 8 months pregnant now, planning to raise the child alone with her parents' support. She was also writing a book about predatory workplace relationships, asking if I'd write the foreword. "I want to call it Standards," her letter explained, "because men like Caleb always talk about standards while having none themselves." The bitter irony wasn't lost on any of us. As the evening wounded down, and the women began leaving, each departure was accompanied by long embraces and promises to maintain our monthly dinners. We'd become an unlikely family bonded by betrayal but defined by our resilience. Sarah was the last to leave, pausing at my door. "You know what struck me most about your statement today? You didn't just expose what he did, you exposed who he really was. There's something powerful about that kind of truth." After she left, I stood at my window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in federal holding, Caleb was beginning his 7-year sentence. Somewhere in Iowa, Amanda was preparing for motherhood. Somewhere in this city, other women were living with similar secrets, similar shame, similar confusion about love versus control. I thought about the woman I'd been at Marcus's party, standing frozen while strangers laughed at my humiliation. She felt like someone I'd known once, but could barely remember now. In her place stood someone harder, perhaps, but also clearer. Someone who understood that real strength wasn't about enduring cruelty, but about exposing it completely and without apology. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus's former penthouse, casting long shadows across marble floors that had witnessed my public humiliation exactly 1 year ago. The realtor, an energetic woman named Beth, who didn't know the history of this space, gestured enthusiastically at the view. "The seller is highly motivated," she said, her voice echoing in the empty rooms. "The bankruptcy trustees want this sold quickly. At half the original purchase price, it's an incredible opportunity." I walked to the spot where I'd stood frozen, while Caleb compared me to a dog, running my hand along the cold glass. The terrace doors were open, and I could see the space where couples had danced that night. The same marble, the same walls, but stripped of furniture and pretense. It looked smaller, somehow, less intimidating. "The maintenance fees are reasonable for a property of this caliber," Beth continued, checking her tablet. "And with your pre-approval amount, you could easily." "I'll pass," I said quietly, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Beth looked confused. "But you haven't even seen the master suite, or the I don't need to own this space to know I've already conquered it. I turned from the window, taking one last look at the empty room. Some victories don't require possession. Sometimes walking away is the real triumph. As the elevator descended, I felt lighter with each floor we passed. I didn't need to transform that penthouse into something else. My transformation had already happened without needing to claim that particular piece of real estate. 2 weeks later, my article appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. When success blinds high-achievement professionals and intimate partner deception examined how career-focused individuals, particularly in medicine and law, often missed signs of emotional and financial abuse in their personal relationships. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My hospital email filled with messages from other doctors, lawyers, executives, mostly women, but some men too, sharing their own stories of how professional success had made them targets for predatory partners who saw achievement as something to exploit rather than admire. Harvard Medical School reached out first, inviting me to speak at their conference on physician wellness. Then Stanford Johns Hopkins and dozens of other institutions. Each speaking engagement revealed the same pattern. Accomplished professionals so focused on their careers that they'd explained away red flags as stress-dismissed cruelty as tough love, rationalized exploitation as partnership. "Your article saved my marriage," a young resident told me after a talk in Boston. "Not because it helped me fix it, but because it helped me realize there was nothing left to fix. I'd been performing CPR on something that died years ago." That phrase, performing CPR on something already dead, had resonated with so many readers that it became the unofficial title of my talks. 3 months after the article's publication, I stood in my parents' backyard in Milwaukee, watching my father blow out 70 candles on a cake my mother had spent 2 days perfecting. The same family members who'd attended my wedding to Caleb were here. But the atmosphere was different now, lighter. No one was pretending anymore. "I never liked him," my Aunt Patricia announced after her 3rd glass of wine. His handshake was too firm, like he was trying to prove something. "You said he seemed charming," my mother reminded her. "I said his teeth were very white. That's not the same thing." Everyone laughed, and I realized this was the first family gathering where Caleb's absence felt like a presence worth celebrating rather than avoiding. "Claire, dear," my father called out, "come here. There's someone I want you to meet properly." David Patterson stood near the garden. My mother tended religiously, looking surprisingly comfortable in jeans and a casual shirt instead of his usual federal prosecutor attire. We developed an unexpected friendship over the months of trial preparation built on mutual respect and absolutely zero romantic undertones. "Your father invited me," David explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "He said I needed to try your mother's potato salad before I could claim to understand the Midwest." And I asked, "Life-changing," he admitted. "I may need the recipe for evidence." My father beamed, clearly pleased with his matchmaking attempt, despite my repeated explanations that David and I were merely friends. What my father didn't understand, what most people didn't, was how valuable that friendship was. David treated me as an equal, sought my opinion on cases involving financial crimes against spouses, never once suggested that my strength was intimidating or my success was excessive. "Eleanor called yesterday," David mentioned quietly while my father got distracted by grandchildren arriving. Caleb's appealing his sentence. "Let him," I said, watching my mother fuss over my sister's children. "Appeals require new evidence. All he has are the same old lies in a different order." 6 months later, I stood in an operating room preparing for one of the most delicate surgeries of my career. Senator Rebecca Walsh's 17-year-old daughter needed a complex valve repair, the kind of procedure that required absolute precision and steady hands. 7 hours later, I emerged from surgery to find the senator waiting with tears in her eyes. "You saved her life," she said, gripping my hands. "How can I ever repay you? I was doing my job." I replied the same response I gave to every grateful parent.
No,
she said firmly. This is more than a job. This is a gift. Have you ever considered healthcare policy? I'm forming a committee on medical access reform.
we need voices like yours.
People who understand both the human cost and the practical realities. I thought about the offer over the following weeks. It would mean less time in surgery, more time in Washington, less direct healing, more systemic change. The kind of opportunity that Caleb would have killed for the prestige, the power, the proximity to influence. But I wasn't Caleb. I didn't need external validation to know my worth anymore. Standing in my office looking at the acceptance letter for the committee position, I thought about that woman on the dance floor, the one who'd leaned in for a kiss and received public humiliation instead. She'd been so desperate for connection that she'd ignored every warning sign, every red flag, every moment of cruelty disguised as humor. That woman had needed to be destroyed for this one to emerge. Caleb's cruelty hadn't broken me. It had broken the shell I didn't know I was living in. His public rejection had forced me to reject the life I'd been accepting, the diminishment I'd been normalizing, the cage I'd been decorating instead of escaping. I signed the committee acceptance letter with the same steady hands that had saved the senator's daughter, that had packed Caleb's belongings, that had held the microphone at countless speaking engagements, where I told the truth about marriages that looked perfect from the outside, but were crime scenes within. The woman who stood frozen on that dance floor was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that real power didn't come from being chosen or validated or included. Came from choosing yourself, validating your own worth, and including your own voice in conversations that mattered. Some words sting, others heal, but the truest words, the ones that cut deepest, are the ones we finally say to ourselves. I deserve better. I am enough. I choose me. If this story of calculated revenge resonated with you, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Claire pulled out her phone at the party and started revealing those forensic audits, watching Caleb's smug victory transform into complete devastation. What was your most satisfying moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories of betrayal and triumph. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.